I don't know if you've ever found yourself in one of these seasons where you're asking the question, God, where are you at? Right? Like as a pastor, I actually get to have these conversations and be in moments with people on a regular basis where they're asking questions like, they're saying things like, I feel distant from God. I feel like he's left me. I have no clue where he is. I feel like there's a wall between God and I feel like I'm talking, but he's not answering. Have you ever found yourself in one of these seasons where and maybe you're in one of those seasons where you're just facing a complete impossibility and you're thinking to yourself, like, God, where are you? Like, please do us a favor, weigh in. Say something, anything. And I know that we can go throughout our day, even our week, and sometimes it can feel like months, maybe even years since you've been like, I felt like I had a relationship, I had a connection with the Lord, but maybe you're in a season where you're just thinking, God, where are you? God, where are you in all this? Where are you in my life? And the question that I feel like we want to answer today, even look at is where's God and how can I find him? Each and every one of us, whether you came here intentionally with this on your heart, or whether you showed up and you're thinking, this is a good question, I need to know the answer to this. This is a good Sunday for you. Because we do desire to know where is God and how can we find him. I want my life to be connected to my Creator on a regular basis. I don't want to go months and weeks and years of my life not knowing where God is, not feeling that connection with my Creator. And so today the goal is to even look at this and ask this question, God, where are you? And how can you be found? How can I find you today? And maybe you showed up here today and you're thinking to yourself, I have wanted to know so desperately, I've asked so desperately, and I just don't know where he is. I feel like God, in a good way, has a surprise for you today to find out exactly where he is and how you can find him. The Bible is chock full of stories of people who ask the exact same question. People were in desperate times, they're in impossibilities, they're in trouble, and they're asking this question, God, where in the world are you and how can you be found? In fact, the Gospels, which is 4 books of the Bible, if you open it up, the Bible's written in these book forms. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is really 4 of his friends. We call them disciples. And these stories basically tell the story of when Jesus was on earth. It's a 3-year period of Jesus' life before he went to the cross. And what we find is that person after person is asking this same question, God, where are you? How can you be found? And I love this. I want to take some time today and just look at one story, because there's so many in the Bible, but there's one story in particular, and it's Peter's story, in which the life of Peter answers this question so perfectly. And we just want to look at this today and see exactly how it happened in the life of Peter. And how did he meet God? And how did he continually find God in everything that he was doing? Peter, what's interesting is the first time Peter met Jesus, or Jesus met Peter, whatever you want to say, is that Peter was doing what he did best. He was a fisherman. And so he would fish usually in the evenings with his brothers. In fact, his dad was a fisherman. And so what we find, this is in Luke chapter 5. This is the moment in which Jesus found Peter, and Peter found Jesus. And Peter goes out and he fishes all night long, only to come in early in the morning. And I'm thinking to myself, why would you fish at night? There must be some reason, right? But these guys obviously didn't like sleeping at night. They wanted to fish at night. So they fished all night, and I'm thinking that's hard work. They show up with the sunrise, and they're cleaning their nets, and there's a crowd that's forming on the shore, and Jesus is actually there, and Peter didn't know Jesus, but Jesus walks over to Peter, and he asks this question. He says, hey, can I borrow your boat? And I'm going to push it out, and I'm going to speak from there, And Peter says, sure, go ahead, And so he's there cleaning his stuff, getting ready to finish. The reality is he probably wanted to go home and take a nap. He probably wanted to go home and go to bed. He's, sure, whatever, you do this, And so Jesus gets on this boat, pulls out. And in fact, when you pull a boat out onto water and you speak onto it, it almost acts as an amplifier. So you could speak to more people and he could be heard. And so Jesus speaks. Obviously nothing in that hit Peter. He's probably sitting there super tired, thinking to myself, okay, come on, wrap this up, he didn't have a clock, but he's thinking to himself, I want to go to bed. It's time to go to bed. Finish this up, wrap, this wonderful speech up. And then Jesus comes back in, he looks at Peter and he says, Peter, now go out and go fishing again. And Peter's thinking to himself, it actually says in the story, it's he told Jesus, I fished all night and I caught nothing. The only people who can go to work for 8 to 10 hours and come back and not make a single dollar are those people who are self-employed. Anyone know what that feels like, right? Self-employed. Now, you go to work and clock in and clock out, good for you, you made your money. But if you're self-employed, you know exactly what Peter's feeling. It's like, no, I just worked 10 hours, I made $0, caught 0 fish, and I want to go home and go to sleep because I'm depressed and sad, and you want to talk in my boat, now you want me to go back out and go to work. And, Peter reluctantly in this story, he just reluctantly is like, okay, there's a crowd, there's Jesus, there's people, there's this anticipation, but he just even made it known, like, I don't really want to do this, but if we're doing a fishing demonstration, I guess that's what I'm in for, So he jumps in the boat with one of his brothers. They go out not far, drop the nets, and as they start to pull up the nets, all of a sudden the nets are completely full of fish. Also, a great, revelation of what it's like to be self-employed, like you win big and then you just don't make money for days, And all of a sudden they pull this up, the net is completely like full. Another boat has to come over to help them get it in. They get to shore and it's completely full. Obviously, Jesus' demonstration after his preaching was awesome. And Peter's sitting here with all of this stuff. And I love Peter's response. It's not the normal response, but he realized, all of a sudden this moment, it says when Peter realized what had just happened, he realized that his doubt, his shame, the fact that he's frustrated, the fact all this, and all of a sudden, then boom, he wins big. This is his response to Jesus. He looks at him and he says, Lord, would you please leave? What? That's not a typical response, I tell my kids all the time, the correct response is, thank you. That's the response you're looking for, Say thank you. That's what you need to say. And he looks at him and he says, Jesus, just leave. All of a sudden, it was interesting as he had this moment. He looks at him and he says, I am such a sinful man. Something about that moment where all of a sudden he had this experience. He could see Jesus, but he all of a sudden experienced and had this God encounter. He realized all of a sudden when it looked back at him, he realized, man, I'm full of sin, I'm full of shame, and I'm frustrated. In fact, Jesus addresses the issue, and he looks at him because Jesus, Peter, in essence, offends him. Hey, go away, I'm sinful, leave me alone, instead of saying thank you. And Jesus looks at him, and in fact, he just says, hey, listen, don't be afraid, Peter. Fear was Peter's root issue. And in fact, we're going to see this throughout the next couple stories that we look at Peter. The root issue, the thing he was holding on to, was he was actually afraid. He was afraid to be exposed, afraid to be seen. He was afraid of what would happen. He was afraid of the future. He really has all the same fears that those who are self-employed feel all the time. Like what's going to happen, and what's the next job, and when's it coming, and what's it going to look like? And he looks at him and he says, do not be afraid. And then all of a sudden he turns, he encourages him. And then he says this, he says, from now on, you're not going to fish for fish, you're going to fish for people. And he gives him an invitation to follow him. And something so impacted Peter that day in that God experience, in that first time meeting Jesus, that Peter left everything. Even after he had just won really big, after he had just I'd be thinking to myself, that was good fishing, I'm going to try that again tomorrow. But he left everything in that moment because of what happened with this encounter between him and Jesus. And he actually, for the next 3 years, followed Jesus through thick and through thin. He traveled with him. He left the boat. He left the water. The point that I pull out of this story, which I just love so much, is that when we're searching for God, he's actually the one who finds us. Peter was desperate. He needed Jesus. He needed something done that was from the impossible. And what's so amazing is that Peter was just going through his day-to-day life, and Jesus found him. We ask the question, where is God? And we need to understand is that he's searching for you more than you're actually searching for him. And these 7 things happened in a God encounter. I don't know if you can look back on your own history of moments in which you've encountered God, but these 7 things happen to Peter over and over and over again. The first one is he finds himself in trouble. That's literally all that Peter brings to the table. Hey, listen, I have an impossibility. I'm in trouble. I'm facing this big issue. And what does God do? God comes in, he does the impossible. He exposes a root issue in Peter, and at the exact same time, he fixes that root issue. And that's why Peter even says, man, I'm sinful. Leave me alone. Why? Because he felt really exposed in that moment. And Jesus came and he fixes that root issue. And then Jesus brought encouragement. He brought purpose. And in this moment, Peter was saved from the situation or the trouble that he was in. And this is what happens in a God encounter. What's cool is that this doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. In fact, when I look back at the different God encounters that I've had, man, these happened in a moment. how in the world can he expose and fix at the exact same time? You know, it's man's problem to expose something and leave no solution. But God never does that. The moment he exposes, he fixes and he heals in the same moment. And then he brings encouragement and he reinstills in us passion and purpose and value. And we walk away from our first God encounter, we as Christians would say, I was saved. But what's so cool is that God's desire is to do this in you over and over and over and over again. This is a life walking with Christ. This is what happens on a regular basis when we encounter God. What we find is then a short time later, that's in Luke chapter 5. In Luke chapter 8, what's really interesting is that Peter's now been hanging out with Jesus, and they needed to borrow his boat as a taxi. A couple of the friends get in it with Jesus, and they're going across this massive sea, and all of a sudden a storm shows up. Maybe you've heard this story before, but it is literally just months later, Peter finds himself in a boat, on water, with Jesus in the area. And guess what he has? The thing he brings to the table, he's in trouble. A storm comes up, he's absolutely freaking out, and Jesus is actually sleeping. I mean, you're thinking to yourself, how? Like, how do you do that? He just slept in the boat. The rest of the disciples saw the storm coming, they saw it hit, they're freaking out, and they're in the middle of this thing, and they're thinking, I'm going to die, we're not going to live, what's happening? Jesus doesn't care. And they wake Jesus up like, hey, Jesus, something's going on. And in a moment, Jesus stands up in the boat, he rebukes the storm, and the entire weather system changes. We're used to that here in Central Oregon, like that, right? We're used to the weather system changing, but they weren't. And all of a sudden, the weather system changes, and they're sitting here like, what just happened? Like in complete, the words that's used is and I love this, they were terrified and amazed at the same time. Because they're thinking, what just happened? And what we see is the same 7 elements in this story, is that they were in trouble. Peter was in trouble. He wakes Jesus up, who was there with him in the boat at the time. Jesus does the complete, absolute impossible. And then you find that they are terrified and amazed. The root issue that we see in Peter over and over again is this fear. There's like this trust issue, this fear issue. It gets exposed and he heals it in a minute. In fact, they stop in the boat and they just start to worship him. There was this new awe and understanding. Jesus encourages them and just says, hey, listen, like, where's your faith? He talks to them about trusting in him. He reveals a portion of their purpose. And in a moment, they were saved from a complete impossibility. They find themselves with yet another God encounter. And then, no joke, right after that, probably maybe 6 months or a year later, what we see now in Matthew chapter 14, if you're writing these down and you're going to read them later, it's just incredible, is that now Jesus, he's been hanging out with Jesus, and Jesus tells him, hey, listen, like, I'm gonna stay here, you're going to take a boat across the lake overnight, and I'm going to meet you there in the morning. And of course, they're probably thinking, like, does he have another boat? Like, you know, what's happening? They said, that's totally fine. So in the night, and I just think to myself, who goes out at night when there's supposed to be a storm coming? Peter obviously does. And he's not checking his phone for weather. So he's just going out. And he finds himself in the exact same situation. This time Jesus isn't in the boat and Jesus isn't on the shore. And him and a group of friends are now in the middle of in a boat on water and find themselves in trouble again. A storm comes up and they're thinking, we're going to die. This is what's going to happen. We're going to die. And in the middle of the night, it must have been a full moon. They look out and there's like this ghost just walking on the water, you know? And it's interesting is that all of the guys in the boat are thinking to themselves, that's a ghost. Like, now they're scared. So not only are they going to die because of the weather, they're just like scary ghost stories. And I don't know who started the scary ghost stories, but one of them did. And then a guy's walking on water. And they're calling out to this guy. I'm thinking to myself, I wouldn't be calling out. I'd be quiet trying to watch him walk by. And they call out to Jesus. And in fact, they're like, hey, if it's you, you know, and they're trying to figure out who it is. Obviously, there was like this understanding of maybe it was Jesus. And Peter, of course, you know, he was a little socially awkward because you think, you know, when Jesus did something amazing, his response was, leave me. But on this one, he looks out at Jesus, which he assumes is Jesus, and he said, if it's you, yeah, tell me to come out there and walk on water. And you can think, like, the other guys in the boat are thinking, really? You know, really? So he's been drinking the salt water. And what are you doing? And Peter, no joke. He says, then come out to me. Peter jumps on the water. This is an amazing story. This isn't a parable that tells a story. This is literally an actual event that happened. And Peter steps on the water and he starts walking on the water. And you could only imagine if that was you, how cool that would feel. Like, I'm doing it. Dun, 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 dun. Like, how cool is that? And then all of a sudden, he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he starts to sink. If you've heard the story, Jesus picks him up. Both of them walk over and he drops him in the boat. And obviously, they're having this total God encounter. And what do we see? 7 elements here. The first one, they're in absolute trouble, right? Jesus does the impossible, this time not from the shore, not from the boat, but literally while walking on water. Something's exposed in them, and it says that they were again terrified and completely amazed. Jesus gets in the boat. They worship him. He encourages them. He even says, listen, you've got, and I'm thinking to myself, this is now round 3, Peter. This is now round 3, same situation, same scenario. Pay attention here. And he keeps saying, why are you doubting me? Why aren't you putting trust in me? And he encourages them. He speaks to purpose, and obviously it was probably a super awkward boat ride the rest of the way. Thinking to yourself, what did I do? And other guys are thinking, well, sure, Peter got to walk on water. I'd be thinking, Jesus, could I try it next? No, too late, you missed the moment. No. And they find themselves in a situation completely saved again. And over again in Peter's life, he continues to have these God moments that involve a boat and water. For Peter, this is like his beautiful place in which he enjoys. It was nostalgic for him. His dad was a fisherman. I don't know if you've ever been on a boat quietly in the water, just the rock of the boat, the sound of the little waves lapping up, the smell of the air. There's something absolutely amazing about the peace sitting on a lake. The ocean is different. It's completely different. But it's like some people are just drawn to this. And Peter was drawn to a boat and to water. He continued to find himself in these situations over and over again. But there was something significant about the first time Jesus found Peter. Because where Jesus found Peter on a boat and in water for the first time, he continues to meet him in that spot over and over and over and over again. And we find as we're looking through his life, I don't want you to miss this moment. There was something significant about the situation or the circumstance, the location in which God first met you. The question I have for you is, where did God find you when he found you first? Maybe you're searching and you say, I don't know if God's ever found me or I've had a God experience. Good news for you, he will find you. You keep searching, you keep looking, he's going to find you. You can trust in him that he will find you. And if you've had a God encounter before, the one thing I was just praying about this week, I felt like the Lord wanted to remind us of, is to remember our first love. That first time in which you had a God encounter. Because there is something so significant about the location, the season, the time, and the place. And the place in which he met you first, he will meet you again and again and again. And I don't know where the first time you met the Lord was, if it was what season of life you were in, if you were inside or outside. These are the questions we have to ask. Where were you the first time you had a God encounter? Were you in a book? Were you at church? Was it morning time or evening time? Were you at home? Were you away or traveling? Was it in quietness or was it in chaos? Was it through music? Was it in worship? Was it by a lakeside, poolside? Was it in a car? Was it during communion? Were you praying? Were you at work or were you at home? These are questions that we're continuing to look at. Was it in a life group? Was I serving other people? What was the situation, the circumstance, and the moment in which God first found me? Because where he first found you, you can always go back to, and he can be found again and again and again. And the encouragement for you and for I this week is to remember where he first found us and to go back to that place because he can always be found. And it was beautiful as we look at Peter's story. These are 3 stories, but Peter spent 3 years with Jesus, and what you find is that they had become best friends, and he was with them all the time. And the end of Jesus' life before he went to the cross is that Peter actually hit a rough patch. And he got to a place where he was with Jesus, and then Jesus got taken by the crowd. And in fact, he was trying to watch and pay attention. And if you know the story of Peter's life, is that he finds himself trying to watch and see what's going to happen. And actually, people are asking him, hey, do you know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? And 3 times, he denies even knowing Jesus. And on the 3rd time, obviously, he's completely guilt-stricken. And he never got to reconnect. He never got to apologize. He never got to fix it with Jesus. The crowd took Jesus, and then Jesus was crucified. And now his best friend, who he left on a bad note, all of a sudden is murdered. And Peter finds himself in a place with another impossibility. How do I connect with my best friend who's now dead? And it's so guilt-stricken and so just in a super bad place. In fact, all the disciples, all his friends were there, and they're just mourning this loss of Jesus. And Peter coins this term, which every man in the room should coin, because it's so important. As he turns around and he looks at everybody else and he says, I'm going fishing. So I'm done. Like I'm finished. I'm going to go back to that. Reality is the boat and water for him was soothing to his spirit, good for his soul. And he says, I'm done. I'm going fishing. I'm out of here. And so Peter, a couple of his brothers and friends were like, all right, sweet, we'll go with you. They all go out in the middle of the night, and they fish through the night, and they caught nothing. Do we not see a setup? The exact same way in which Jesus found Peter. Peter's like, listen, I'm just going to go back to those things that I don't know how to find God. I don't know where he is. I'll never find him again. And he finds himself on a boat and in water. And it says that they caught nothing all night. And then, this is in the story of John 21. John tells this story now. And it says as they were fishing, they caught nothing all night. They were obviously away from the shoreline, and there was someone on the shore yelling at them. And the person yelling at them said, hey, throw your net to the other side. And I don't know if you've fished, but if you're catching nothing here, you usually catch nothing here too. You need a whole new location. And if you don't know that about fishing, we should probably teach you some few things about fishing. And they're like, are you kidding me? And probably a last-ditch effort, probably because maybe it felt nostalgic. They picked it up, they threw it on the other side, and what happened? They started pulling this up, and the net was completely full again. The exact same way that Jesus found Peter in the first place. And I love this story because it's obviously written by John. And he says this, the disciple that Jesus loved said to Peter, John wrote this. That's like saying, Jesus really loves me, and he thinks I'm awesome, but I'm going to now tell you this. Oh, John. He got to write it, so I guess that's how it works, right? He looks at him and he says to Peter, Peter, I think that's Jesus on the shore. And Peter, he doesn't wait to get back in the boat. Peter jumps off the boat and he swims to shore. A complete impossibility in his life. Jesus had just died. He was gone. And all of a sudden, Peter finds himself in a boat on the water in the exact same way that Jesus met him in the first time. And he swims to the shore, and it's a beautiful story if you take time to read it this week. In fact, this is called the reinstatement of Peter. And they have breakfast, they hang out, and then he pulls Peter aside. And he asks Peter the same question 3 times. He says, Peter, do you love me? Of course I love you. And then he says, well, then feed my sheep. And he asks him 3 times. On the 3rd time, it says that Peter's heart was broken because he was exposed, because he had denied him 3 times. And Jesus asked him 3 times, do you love me? And he was broken in that moment. And in fact, Jesus comes in, and I love this. He does the impossible. He exposes and he heals at the exact same moment. He gives encouragement to Peter. He gives purpose and calling to Peter. He speaks about the calling on the rest of his life. And then in this moment, Peter goes from complete chaos and impossibility to a place of promise again. Absolute beautiful story on a boat in water. And I don't know what your boat or your water looks like. And I often wonder, after that moment, how many times Peter would get on a boat and just go to connect with Jesus. Because it seems like every time that Peter got in a boat, he had a God encounter. And I want to remind you of this. If you are here today and you've never had a God encounter, he will find you. He is looking for you. You keep drawing near, you keep knocking, you keep asking, but he will find you wherever you are, and he will connect with you. Not to shame you, but to expose those things in us that need healing, that need fixed, to bring encouragement, to bring purpose, and to walk away saying, I was saved in this moment. The question I have for you is, where did God find you first? You know, Jesus' spot in which he connected with his Father was different. It wasn't on a boat and it wasn't in water. If you read through the Gospels, you're going to find quite often Jesus, it said he would leave before the sun came up, and he would withdraw to a solitary place by himself in the dark to watch the sun rise. In fact, we know, because it even says it, that he would go to a garden by himself. I don't know if you've ever walked around in the dark. Like, there's just something beautiful about the quietness and the stillness. There's something amazing about the sun popping up and seeing the sun rise. The high schoolers in this room, you don't know what that's like. It's when the sun first comes up. I know it magically appears, but it just comes up magically. And yeah, and all the old people don't know when it goes down. So it does this cool thing. It's a weather thing. And it's pretty awesome. But that was Jesus' boat, and his water was a garden in the dark to watch the sun rise and to connect. That's where he connected with his dad. That's the last place he went before he went to the cross. And I don't know where your boat and your water is. For me, mine's always on an adventure. And I met Jesus for the first time, and I meet him every time in a book and through music. Every single time I'm facing an impossibility, I grab his word, and I start to journal, and I start to read, and he meets me every single time. Because that was the first time I met him. Man, if I feel distant and disconnected, I throw on worship music, or I grab a guitar, and I start to worship, and he meets me every time. For me, every single time I'm on an adventure or I'm in play, I'm playing and enjoying this beautiful earth in which he created, I feel so close to the Lord. Every single time. Where is he? He's exactly in the same spot he met me for the first time. And the question I have for you, or even the challenge this week, is to go back and ask, where did he meet you the first time? Because if he met you there, he will meet you there again. Every time Peter showed up on a boat in water, he had a God encounter. And so where is it that he met you for the very first time? What is your boat and your water? Kelsey, would you come up? I picked this song. I want to sing this song together as we leave. And I just felt like the heart behind even this week is to remind you, and I feel like the Lord wants to remind you. He's been wanting to remind me. Because I feel distant from him as well. There are moments in my life in which I don't feel like I'm connected. I don't feel like I'm locked in. I don't feel like, hey, we're having a great moment or a God encounter. And I felt like the Lord even just reminded me this week, remember your first love and return to that. Where was the first place that he met you? Was it inside or outside? What season of life were you in? What was taking place in that moment? Were you in a book? Were you on an adventure? Was there music in the background? What were you doing in this moment? Because the place in which he met you first, he wants to remind you that he will continually meet you time and time and time and time again. I talked to someone after first service who said, I continually meet God at church. I'm thinking, that's good. That says you're going to a good church. Like, that he's there, you know? For me, I'm the same. And I look at it and I go, you know what? As soon as we determine where it is that I meet God, man, start to build your life and your calendar around where you constantly meet him. If you meet him in a place all the time, I would encourage you, find a job that puts you in that place all the time. Find a way to be in that place all the time. Don't find yourself in a place that says, I met him once at this super obscure place in the super obscure time, and I can never find it again. I guarantee you, wherever he met you for the first time was a part of your daily life. He met you in your daily life, whether it's you're in the car driving, you're in between, or you're taking a moment in the morning or the evening, or it was on a patio, or it was on the inside, wherever it was. I want to encourage you. And I feel like the Lord even wants to encourage you this week to go back to that place in which he first found you, to go fishing and bring your impossibilities, bring all those things in your life in which you don't know what to do with, because he desires to do the impossible in your life over and over again. And what he did in the first moment that he met you, he wants to continue to do over and over and over and over again. I want to pray, and I want to sing this song together. And I do want to say, this week and for every week, go back to the place in which you first met. God's desire is to meet with you and to do the impossible in your life. And if you have yet to meet with God and have a God encounter, hands down, 200% you can trust him. He will find you. And so we're going to pray and believe that he's going to find you this week, and that you have an aha revelation moment, a God encounter that so rocks your world this week. So Lord, we believe together for those people here in the room who've never had a God encounter or listening online. Lord, would you come this week and would you find each and every person that is searching for you? May they have a God encounter that changes the course of their life, that exposes those things inside of them, Lord, that you can heal in a moment. Would you do the impossible in each and every one of our lives? And Lord, I pray for each and every person who has had a God encounter in the past, that you would bring to remembrance the place, the location, the time in which you first met them and found them. Lord, would we go back this week to the place in which we encountered you, and would we encounter you again? Lord, we love you, and our hearts are to pursue you and to know you. Thank you, Lord, that you take the impossibilities in each and every one of our life. You heal us, you encourage us, you give us purpose and calling, and you save us. We love you, Lord. In Jesus' name.